Hello, and welcome to Vision 2222, the podcast where we talk with experts, researchers, and leaders in materials and manufacturing, finance and industry, energy, science, and the humanities, both to know what's going on today and to peer into the future. We ask questions that inspire our guests to imagine what our world will be like 20, 50, or even 200 years into the future. And we have a lot of fun in the process. The hosts of Vision 2222 are Mikhail Gladkeek, Ph.D. mathematician, product development veteran, leader in advanced manufacturing and digital inventory management, and science fiction author. Amanda Chady has a Ph.D. in biochemistry and molecular biology, and she mentors early-stage startups in the health sciences, helping entrepreneurs so their dreams can survive and thrive in the real world. And I'm John Marsh, an administrator at a research university where I get a ringside seat to some of the amazing discoveries that will help humanity navigate successfully into the future. Steven Winston, Ph.D., has reinvented himself several times across the years, many years, from his pioneer roots in Nebraska to going to chemical engineering, then nuclear engineering, connecting with the popular music industry, becoming the confidant of the largest technology and defense contractor in the world, to leading a loose but highly effective confederation of scientists and physicians that addresses global health problems. Now, Steve and I met in Edmonton, Alberta, and I think about 2010, and have worked together on a variety of things since then, bringing people together. And I'd like to welcome Steve to Vision 2222.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so there are lots of things about you, Steve, as we know, that are unusual and interesting, but I'd like to ask you about a couple of them, because they say a lot about your approach to the world, including your willingness to buck or simply ignore the conventional way of doing things, right? So first, tell us about that time when you attended medical school without being a medical student.
Well, I was interested in neural nets, believe it or not. That was, and I don't know if you've ever heard of liquid AI. Liquid AI is kind of a different approach. Instead of using massive data to accomplish things, it uses a minimal set. And it's very flexible. And I was very interested in how it is that a stink bug figures out where it's going with its minuscule brain. And I was interested in how a bird knows where to go based on its minuscule brain. And if you've ever seen a squirrel navigate a power line and run effortlessly across it, or a cat walking through the snow, its proprioception is so good that it doesn't have to look where it's putting its foot. Its back foot goes where its front foot was, without any error, and it can move effortlessly through the snow without getting its feet any colder than it has to. So I was amazed at what we call artificial intelligence, which is nothing more than a statistical exercise. And I prefer to call it artificial stupidity, because the devices with which I interact are so incomprehensibly stupid in comparison to, say, if Alexa, or Echo, whatever it is you use in your house, a question, a 5-year-old can generally come up with a better follow-on answer than Alexa can. And Alexa has access to an amazing amount of data, but Alexa is not thinking. That is not intelligence. Chat GPT is the same thing. It's not thinking. So people who fear artificial intelligence are probably kidding themselves about how far we've come. I look at it, how far do we have to go? So what does that have to do with medical school? So with that in mind, I decided that the only way to really understand how real intelligence works is to learn a little bit more about real intelligence. And I figured, boy, this brain has been figured out a long time ago with all these medical scientists. So in 1984, I said, well, Pitt has a bunch of classes in neuroscience. I'll just take them. So I went to Pitt and tried to sign up for these graduate courses in neuroscience. Well, it turns out all the prerequisites were taught at medical school. You had to take physiology. You had to take all these courses.
Mm.
So I just enrolled in them, and nobody asked me any questions. I just enrolled, and I did that for 3 years. And then somebody came up to me and said, Dr. Winston, we don't have a record of your MedCat. And I said, well, I didn't take the MedCat. And they said, well, how did you get in here? And I said, I signed up for the courses. And they said, really? Well, where are you going to do your residency? And I said, I'm not going to do residency. I don't
want a medical degree.
They said, well, why are you here? And I said, to learn. So that was the poor lady. I think it blew her mind. I don't think she'd ever encountered somebody who just wanted to learn.
Yeah.
But that's the only reason I went, and I didn't graduate.
Right.
I'm not an MD. I'm just an amateur playing around biology.
So then the next thing that I wanted to ask you was when we met. So you remember we met in the Alberta Innovates office area, I think, up in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And one of your first statements to me was something along the lines of, I want to conspire with you. And you have a special use of the word conspire that was at that time to me unique. So tell me a little bit about positive conspiracy.
Well, the word collaborate is something that very serious-minded
people do,
and the very serious-minded will collaborate because of good intention. I guess that's the whole point: is good intention. And conspiracy is always put forward in the context of bad intention. And
right.
I always like the concept of Christmas time when you're naughty or nice. And I'd rather be naughty because naughty is so much more fun than nice. That's the only reason we do naughty things, is because we're not supposed to, and it's fun. And besides that, we get to hold secrets and all these things. And it occurred to me when I looked across the board in academia, and some of these people are people that I won't name them for sake of clarity, but they refuse to collaborate for fear that somehow someone else will be recognized for work that they feel like they had the singular intuition to explore. And it occurred to me that the only way to get these people to cooperate with one another is to suggest to them that we can keep it a secret. And if we can keep it a secret, then we must be conspiring. So I thought, well, maybe what we need to do is get people to conspire with one another, since they're afraid to openly collaborate.
Okay.
Somehow that they may get scooped, and that the patent office may recognize someone else. And it comes back to the idea that it's rather interesting that Alexander Graham Bell and another guy named Nikola Tesla arrived at the patent office one after the other. And Alexander, no, it was no, I'm sorry, it was not Alexander Graham Bell. It was Nikola Tesla and Marconi that actually arrived at the patent office one after the other. And Marconi got the patent because he got to the patent office 10 minutes earlier, I guess. I don't know if it was 10 minutes or 15 minutes or a half a day. But they both filed for patent on the radio at the same time in 1895. And I guess the question is, who got the credit? Well, Marconi got the credit. That's one of those interesting things. There's also, in my own personal career, I was interested to find out, because I spent a lot of time, 50 years, in nuclear, trying to figure out who really discovered nuclear fission. Well, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann did the experimental work, and they were extremely perplexed with what is it that we've just discovered here, because we can't account for all of this excess energy that's being produced. And they talked to their colleague, a woman named Lisa Meitner. And Lisa Meitner said, the only place it could come from is if you had actually caused the fission of uranium-235. So who discovered nuclear fission? Was it Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann? They're the ones who were credited for it. They weren't the ones who figured it out. Lisa Meitner did. Interestingly, for a whole bunch of reasons, Lisa Meitner has rarely gotten credit for what she did, which was really the profound part of it. So my thought is, maybe if I can induce academics to conspire with one another, we can get more done. And that falls in the context of transcending incrementalism, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't do little incremental things. We need to amalgamate increments to make giant leaps.
Right. I appreciate your going over that again with us because with me, because I've been trying to encapsulate what your approach is. And you and I have been associated with each other for so long that I had forgotten some of those details, and they're really important details. I'm going to hand it over to Amanda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Steve. And it's your story with Lisa actually brought up another discovery that should have been attributed to a woman is the discovery of the structure of DNA, right? Watson and Crick, they get most of the recognition. They got the Nobel Prize for it, but it was really Rosalind Franklin who had the X-ray crystallography data. Unfortunately, she died, so she couldn't get awarded after her death. But, that story just brought up a lot of emotion as well. So I want to jump into basically a portion of your vast pool of your remarkable career to preface my first question. You had a lengthy career in nuclear power, retiring as chief scientist of the Idaho National Labs, while serving as senior vice president of Lockheed Martin. And you continue to work after your retirement, serving as a direct advisor to the legendary Norm Augustine. So for our listeners that don't know, he was also chairman and CEO of Lockheed, now since retired. So this stellar career as a thought leader in nuclear power led to probably one of your proudest achievements, which is launching and building the Crisiscience. Is that how you say it? Crisiscience Collaborative or Crisiscience?
Yep. Crisiscience, yes.
Crisiscience. Okay. So the story goes that you had a wacky Zoom meeting where you brought people with great scientific expertise together to brainstorm ideas to help with COVID-19. I am sure that there's more to this story. So let's hear a little bit about Crisiscience Collaborative. Who was involved with it? How did it gain momentum? And how did it help people in the world? And tell us a little bit about the future of it.
Okay. Well, it was purely accidental, first of all. It wasn't with intent of any kind, even naughty intent. It was largely born of curiosity about what is this disease? Where did it really come from? And how many of us, especially those of us over the age of 65, which I'm almost 74 now, are we really at risk? How is this disease communicated and what's going on? And I was perplexed by the lack of realistic information that we were getting from the national administration at the time, which was nothing if not opaque and confusing at best. And then you had our
a certain elected official
going forward with all kinds of crazy things about, and later on, he was talking about drinking Clorox and shining lights on your intestines. I don't know what he had in mind. So I thought, well, maybe I need to talk to somebody inside the administration to try and figure out what the heck they really do know. So I called up a friend of mine, John Preston, who for a long period of time had worked with the little school called the MIT, doing their tech transfer, and he introduced me to a guy named
Name withheld to protect the guilty. We'll call him John.
With the idea in mind that John knew somebody in the administration at that time.
What followed in the original conversation was a description from Steve of an interaction with people connected to the then presidential administration that did not go well. And the interaction did not go well because of other people, not because of Steve.
And I thought, that isn't how government is supposed to work. So I talked with John Preston and I said, I don't think that's going to be the way we're going to get this information. And so I said, let's have a conference call on Wednesday. And we started out with a conference call with a few folks with John. And there was another guy named Harry Bouchon. And Harry knew a company that was developing something that might be appropriate for this. And so he turned me on to a guy named Tom Hodge. Tom Hodge was the chief scientist for this little company. And he had previously worked as a professor in Georgia. And he had also previously worked in the CDC as an immunologist. So Tom and I hit it off and we started having regular conversations. And I started hosting these Zoom meetings with Tom Hodge and John Preston. And Tom said, we're discussing a lot of things about this COVID stuff. We need to maybe expand the number of people that we're talking to. And Tom says, well, let me invite some of my friends. And so I invited some of my friends and John invited some of his. And son of a gun, pretty soon we had 20 people who were coming. And then we said, well, maybe we should just do this on a regular basis. And so I started having these Thursday meetings that started at noon Eastern time. And pretty soon there were 50 people. And then there were 60 people. And then there were 70 people. They just kept proliferating. And most of the time we talked about immunology and the vagaries of this little virus. But as we talked about it more and more medical researchers started joining us, and more equipment and manufacturers started joining us. And there was this company called Xthera that John Preston was working with, that the excorporeal device that works through, it does the same
thing that your kidneys
do. It has heparin, which is something that you find on the glycocalyx of your cells, and heparin binds to the bad stuff in your blood. And so this heparin filter was being used initially to explore ways in which we could address cancer. And but they said, well, it might work if we used it to take out viruses in the blood. And of course, the CDC said SARS-CoV-2 is not in the blood. It's not in the blood. Well, it turns out it is in the blood, and it's with the viremia is very high. So we started applying this with an emergency use authorization. And under the EUA, they found out, at the Walter Reed Army Hospital, a guy named Dr. Chung, and a guy named Dr. Steven Olson applied it, and they worked very well. And there's another guy named Jan Kielstein in Germany, who is a renal specialist. So the filter was plugged in line with a dialysis machine. And son of a gun, the people in Germany started getting better. And the people at Walter Reed Army Hospital started getting, these were people who were really seriously sick. And some of them were almost literally on their deathbeds. And then finally, they used it on somebody who was literally on her deathbed. And she walked out of the hospital 3 days later on her own power. So it seemed to be a miraculous cure. Then during our Thursday meetings, we were talking with people that Tom Hodge knew, and he knew a doctor in Georgia named Stephen Chitty. And Stephen said, well, let me use it. And so he actually used the filter successfully and treated literally hundreds of people who were literally on their deathbed. And as a consequence, this caught the attention of 60 Minutes, a guy named Sam Hornblower. They brought it up. Then came to the attention of Dr. Ben Solomon, who is the renal care guy and in charge of ICU for Trinity Hospital System. And he used it, and that came to the attention of ABC News. And they put it on the news that Dr. Solomon had saved these people's lives. And then that got to, through our Thursday meeting, it got to Dr. Stephen Stogner in Mississippi. And he used it, and he saved lives. And then this got to a thoracic surgeon from Harvard named Norchasm, Dr. Norchasm. And he said, let's use cyclosporin, and cyclosporin on a Hispanic guy who was in very serious condition. Now, cyclosporin is a very dangerous thing to use. You have to be a knowledgeable thoracic surgeon to use it, but he saved this guy's life. So the bottom line is that during COVID, because we were talking among a whole wide variety of people, from people who were involved in policy, to people who are involved in just engineering, to people who are doing research, physicians that are actually in hospitals. We ended up literally just by cross-communicating or conspiring, if you will, with one another to save literally thousands of lives as a consequence. One of the consequences of people who wouldn't normally talk to one another getting together in context and where information that was reliable could be exchanged. And as a consequence, now the list of institutions, corporations, and medical researchers and medical schools that participate in crisis science is over 250. So I couldn't list them all, but the among the more prominent are Stanford, Harvard, Texas A&M, University of Florida, University of Arizona. So there's just an incredible list of Scripps Institute is involved, an incredible list of colleges, universities, and major corporations that participate. And it keeps growing day by day. I don't know when it'll ever quit.
It's a remarkable story, and just from your telling it from the beginning to when it started to now, I can maybe have like 3 takeaways or 3 lessons learned, and you can tell me if you agree with this. It seems that there's so many stepping stones to just getting what you want, right? You started asking questions, they led to one person, then another, and eventually you would meet the right person in which to start something. The second thing I realized or got from your story is that really that great things just need to be started with 1 to 2 people, right? And you say you conspire to get things done, right? So it just, from where it is right now, it's just really you with another, I think was like Tom and John, just getting together and wanting to accomplish something. And the third lesson that I got from it is really how discussions from your Zoom meeting led to applications. Yeah. Things being tested in the hospitals. You would come back, say, hey, this worked, this didn't work. And, just really trial and error in making things applicable in the real world. So that was a remarkable story. And I'm glad that it's like all over the US now in many academic institutions.
Well, and even beyond the US.
Yeah, well, I didn't mention University of Alberta and Reggio Calabria, Italy, and Hannover Hochschule in Germany, Imperial College of Medicine in London, Imperial College of London, the medical school, and Oxford University, folks from Japan, folks from Singapore, folks from all over the world, including Misha Sitskovsky, who studied in the Kurchatov Institute in Russia. And Misha is just a whole lot of fun. And then we've got a whole bunch of folks from the Ukraine. Milana Bookman-Trounce, who was educated in Ukraine, and her mother is still a psychiatrist in Ukraine. So there's just a ton of folks that we were involved with.
This is an amazing story, Steve. Thank you for sharing. As usual, we've had a lot of examples how innovation and progress happens at this intersection of different disciplines and different sciences. This interdisciplinary research is absolutely crucial. And I have in mind, there's an example in Houston, there's an organization called Pumps and Pipes. And this combines people from the medical arena, from oil and gas, and from aerospace. If you really zoom out, things are about pumps and pipes, like your heart, your blood vessels, the oil production, and how you fly in outer space and how it all connects. And there's a lot of examples and a lot of collaboration, and people just are not aware of what's happening in those different areas, right? And they learn from each other and say, oh, I can do that in a blood vessel. I can use a similar technology that oil industry is using. Then this is really amazing. This is how it happens. Back to the questions. I was looking at your background, and there's some very fascinating areas and disciplines that you've been involved in. So, for example, you mentioned working at the intersection of nuclear and nano. So the first question is, how do you define nanotechnology, and what is that excites you about that interdisciplinary research at the intersection of nuclear and nano specifically?
Well, it's interesting how that came about. I was working with the production of Moly 99. And Moly 99 is important because it is the precursor to technetium 99M. And you make Moly 99 by bombarding moly in a nuclear reactor to make Moly 99. Now, the reason that technetium 99M is important is it's used as a diagnostic tool. It's the most widely used diagnostic or radio diagnostic that we have, and it enables us to do imaging of the body that we couldn't otherwise do in some rather intriguing ways. It's called single photon emission computed tomography, or SPECT. And I was looking at ways to do this with an accelerator, with the Idaho Accelerator Center, which I helped start in 1996. And we were looking at ways in which we could take the Bremsstrahlung and use that to bombard Moly 99 and actually get a transition reaction that we could capture. And the objective was to use super thin foils and try and accomplish this at a molecular scale. Now, of course, when a nuclear reaction occurs, the dispersion goes off in 4 pi steradians. So that meant that we'd have to figure out how to design this geometrically so that we could maximize the production. Well, in so doing, I started, if you're going to try and do something on the molecular scale, then you need to be at least able to go to the next best thing, which is the nanoscale. So we started looking at nanoscale properties, and it occurred to me that this was back in 2011, I believe, that the whole nuclear industry was ignoring the things that were happening at the molecular scale and was looking at everything in the macro scale. And I thought that's almost absurd, because the fundamentals of nuclear are all atomic, not molecular. That's a whole nother scale above. Why are we focusing all of the work that we do on everything on a macro scale, and why not a micro scale, or at least a step closer to the atomic scale by going nano? And we looked at the properties of a whole bunch of different things, and so slowly, and this is part of what John helped me set up at Rice University with Jim Tour and with Andrew Barron at the time, we started having these transcending incrementalism sessions on a nanonuclear, looking at things that happen at the nanoscale that could actually benefit nuclear. And we started off with a bunch of intriguing ideas, including additive manufacturing, and then subtractive manufacturing, which is also an interesting thing. A whole nother and different approach, and then ways in which we could take advantage of some of the nanoscale properties of different things like graphene or boron nitride. And that has to do with the geometry of a graphene sheet and its ability to actually reflect different types of radiation, particularly if you take a sheet of graphene, which is at the molecular scale, has a pyramidal structure. And that pyramidal structure is 119 degrees, and that is, the pyramids are all 119 degrees removed from one another. And you can take boron nitride sheets that are similar, and they are pyramidal as well, but they don't match exactly. So you can create an interference pattern or a diffraction grating in effect that will actually reflect certain types of radiation. Unfortunately, not neutrons, but it will reflect both beta and gamma. And the value proposition there is that instead of absorbing the radiation, which is the way we protect ourselves from the radiation of a reactor or any type of radioactive device, we use a heavy substance like lead, and we use big, thick layers of it, or sometimes we use concrete, 4 feet of concrete around things to absorb the energy. And that also means that we have to have a way to dissipate the heat that is absorbed from the deposited. But if you can reflect it or reflect it back, that can be something lightweight. So there's a lot of nano properties that are now being studied on an extensive scale by all of the national labs. And largely it started off with us creating the provocative question of why isn't anybody looking at nanonuclear? That's where that came from.
No, thank you. I appreciate it sharing this deep technical background. This is exciting.
So, Steve, I want to touch more on your career in nuclear power, because I know that you have a lot of experience working in a corporate world. You are an independent consultant. You've collaborated or conspired or been naughty with top university researchers. You also have a pretty firm grasp on how scientific innovation works, how politics work. I believe you really have a good understanding of government policy, spending, corporate and university research. And of course, we live in a world or a time now of innovation. Sometimes these things work together with great synergy, and sometimes with, it's very dysfunctional. So reflecting on your decades of experience within these 3 aspects of like government, policy, university, corporate, can you talk to us about what you think is the future of scientific and technical innovation? Do you think it's headed off a cliff and we're going to revert to hunting our food back like in the Stone Age after wars and pandemics and climate crisis? Or do you think that we as a human race, we're going to move forward into a golden age? So are you kind of a glass half full or glass half empty perspective on the future of innovation and science?
Well, I look at it this way. I think innovation in science will follow roughly the same curve as the real estate world. And when I say the real estate world, you see these great increases in prices on real estate, and everybody says it's going to go up, it'll never stop. It crashes and it goes way down, and then it comes back up again, and then it goes way down, and then it goes back up. But the curve tends to be up. If you looked at what a house cost in 1950 and compare it to the price of a house today, you'll see that there's a dramatic difference in the average price. But during that time frame, there's been a whole lot of booms and a whole lot of busts. And there has been times when you thought the real estate couldn't possibly get any lower. The same thing has happened in the market, where there's been booms and busts and booms and busts, but the curve continues to be, if you did a regression on it, it continues to be upward. So what do I think of science? Well, I think science is going to go through boom and bust, but it's going to continue up. There's an unfortunate period of time where we're going through right now where everybody wants to go back to the Stone Age and ignore everything that has ever happened and pretend like the earth is flat. There's even a flat earth society, believe it or not. It just staggers the imagination. There are people who truly believe that the earth is flat. No one ever walked on the moon. And there are people who believe that evolution didn't occur and that we aren't as a consequence that we are. And by the way, we evolved from rats. So it's not surprising that we would find people like that in our leading our country. But fortunately, that was that we evolved from rats because the dinosaurs were eaten by a meteor that hit the Yucatan. We'll see an awful lot of up and down and up and down and up and down, but we'll see science struggle along. And despite the people who would like to bury their heads in the sand and say, we don't need any more science because that stuff is scary, I believe that we will continue to learn and evolve. But it's not going to evolve in the ways that we think it will. It's not going to evolve in the ways that people want it to. And there's an interesting observation that circulates from time to time, and that is that science advances one funeral at a time. And that's kind of true, because the old guard is a little bit like the Vatican, is that we insist on our orthodoxy. And we really, really fight against novel new ideas. And so fortunately, we have young people that come along and kick us out of our complacency. And I probably hold a whole bunch of specific ideas too dear. And at some point, I'll get complacency, and those ideas will be replaced. My ideas will be replaced by a more accurate and more, I guess, innovative thinking. So innovation will occur, and us old guys got to get out of the way.
Right. I like your analogy with the real estate, because recently online I saw this meme. It shows a lot of older people just dancing away, doing swing dancing. And the title of the meme was like, these are the baby boomers after they bought a house for $50,000 and sell it for $250,000. So that just shows the real estate, it does go through boom and bust, but prices increase.
The slope seems to be inexorably up, and
Yeah.
therefore, I guess looking at the future, I'm not sure what the value, if one looks at everything in a purely philosophical way, of anything is, but I think we will continue to see some surprising developments. The one of them that surprises me is how fizzy drinks are becoming the big thing. And even McDonald's is opening a new test market. They call it Cosmic, and they're going to try and compete with the fizzy drinks and Starbucks and Dutch Brothers. And I'm thinking, really?
Am I? Well, looking at more speculation about the future, one of the things I've enjoyed talking with you about, Steve, through the years is the crazy things that seem outrageous when I heard about them at first, but then might actually be really important and useful. I think you mentioned several years ago, I know you talked about a way to enable hypersonic travel using novel ways of heat dissipation. Do you remember talking with me about that? Is that still something that's going on?
Well, yeah, the answer is yes, and it potentially is the future of electricity, and it's actually thermionic generation. It's kind of interesting that we find ourselves in a situation where almost all of the technologies outside of wind and solar that we consider for making electricity involve boiling water, and that's something Robert Fulton actually began to explore a couple of 100 years ago. Really, so that's how a nuclear power plant is all about boiling water largely. I mean, there are options where you can make hot gas, the so-called high temperature gas cooled reactors. Mm-hmm. But essentially still what we're doing is we're heating up a medium and then expanding the heated or compressed medium through a bunch of turbine blades in order to be able to get work out of it. And then the work sometimes goes to making electricity. Sometimes that work goes to propelling a submarine. But the bottom line is that there are other ways to make electricity. And if you think of a piece of metal as something akin to a glass of water, the thing that keeps the molecules of water from jumping into the air is the surface tension. So think of the surface tension as an analog to the surface of the metal. And you're probably aware that metals have free roaming electrons, free range electrons, if you will, that are running through the lattice all the time. And what keeps those electrons from jumping out of the metal and being completely free the bottom line is similar to surface tension in a water glass. There's a thing called the work function at the surface of the metal. And so to overcome that work function, an electron has to have enough energy to jump out. And it has to have, to escape, it has to have enough energy after it jumps out or transcends the work function to escape. And then it's going to be captured by something else, because electrons are just, everybody wants one, because there's all kinds of species that still need an extra electron.
Right.
So you've got to catch them fast if you want to make electricity. So a thermionic device is something that actually reduces the work function of the metal so that more electrons can escape. And then it also has a way to capture those electrons as they come out. And by capturing those electrons, you can actually make a current, and you can go back around, around and around. That's called thermionic emission. And the best way to get those electrons off is to heat up the metal. And the hotter you make the metal, the more electrons that boil off. They can actually overcome the work function, if you will. So that's an easier way, perhaps, than but the temperatures have to be higher than the temperature to boil water. But thermionic emission was exploited by Lockheed Martin in hypersonics, because when you have an airplane that's going hypersonic, even at very high altitudes, the leading edge of the airplane, the wings, the leading edge of the wings and the tip of the nose of the airplane becomes very, very hot. And a way to cool it is actually to take those electrons off and take them back to the back of the wing and bring them around in a circuit. And so that thermionic cooling is a very clever way to actually cool the front of the leading edge of the wing in the front of the airplane, and generate electricity at the same time, electricity that you can use to power all of the electronic equipment that's on the airplane. So
this is already in use.
Well, no, that's classified.
Oh, okay. So it may already be in use.
Yeah, it might already be in use. Yeah.
Let's throw it over to you, Amanda.
All right. So we're going to now switch gears a little bit and focus on self-reflection. So self-reflection, I feel it's a powerful exercise if we want to do things better. And I also personally believe in mentoring. I'm also a mentor myself. I work with many startups, and I'm really excited to see them succeed. And it's a way of giving back. What advice would you give to young people who aspire to make a positive change in the world in whatever field? It could be music, science, technology, or even politics. Or you could look at it another way. If a younger Steve showed up, what advice would you have for him from then to now?
Well, I'd say the self-reflection would be transcend my hormones.
So basically, don't marry that first one.
Well, that one, and actually try to figure out a way to incorporate that drive toward the other goals that you might have. And I wish I could have harnessed some of that stray energy, if you will, dark matter, and being those evil thoughts that I was harboring as a consequence of the circulating testosterone. It would have served me better if I could have stayed focused a little bit longer in my youth. And as I've gotten older, the circulating testosterone has dropped off to the level where I can actually concentrate for more than 10 minutes. So I don't know how you transcend that, but I guess the advice that I would give my younger self is figure out how to harness that energy in a positive way. I've done okay, but I hate to think of how much more I could have done if I had stayed focused a little better.
So you think that just avoiding distractions, quote unquote, because when you say focus, because being youthful, in your youth there are many distractions, and people just ride the wave of youthful exuberance. So I know it can It's really hard on parents, I'm sure.
Well, I think there's a natural part of our existence is reproduction, and I don't think you can hide from it. I know that people, particularly of a Catholic persuasion, some of them decide that they're going to be celibate their entire lives, and it seems to be manifest in not necessarily healthy ways, and the consequences of it. So I don't think you can hide from it. It's a reality that it pervades our lives. I think the best thing for us to do is figure out how to most beneficially harness that energy and take advantage of the fact that we are two diverse genders. There's a long list of differences among the ways in which that's expressed, and it's dominating our society in rather interesting ways. LGBTQ plus, and I know that there's other letters of the alphabet that have been added to that. That's a broad spectrum of different perspectives on a subject that we tend to avoid, and that's our sexuality and the ways in which it's expressed. But it's also a manifest part of evolution. And the other thing that I think is important is for us to recognize that those different perspectives enable us to assess the world in ways that give us an opportunity, like transcending incrementalism, like Crisiscience collaborative. It is the difference in those perspectives on life that enable us to make advances and to collaborate. The main thing, though, is to recognize that it's not a competition. A lot of people talk about the war of the sexes, and I don't believe it's a war. I think it's potentially a collaboration between men and women, men and men, women and women, that in all different ways that will enable us to make the greatest advances. But figuring out how to avoid the conflicts that arise. Gays don't have to fight with lesbians. Lesbians don't have to fight with straight women. Straight women don't have to fight with straight men. We can collaborate, and figuring out how to make the maximum advantage of those different perspectives is the way I think we'll advance not only science, but society.
So this podcast is called, obviously, Vision 2222, right? And part of it is looking into the future, what our world would look like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years into the future. So this question is actually meant to sort of take you out of your comfort zone and really think about the possibility of time traveling. So do you think time travel is possible? And if yes, do you think that it's only forward, backward, or both ways? So basically, can you scramble an egg and can you descramble it, right? So let us know some of your thoughts on time travel. And the second part of the question that I want you to answer is, and this is actually the fun part, I love this question, is if a time machine appears in front of you and you can go anywhere in time, and it can be out of your lifetime, would you go forward in time, backward in time, or where would you go and why?
Okay. Well, is time travel possible? No.
Possible.
Do all moments in time coexist at the same time? Yes. Can we traverse that plane? And I guess you can start with the Code of Hammurabi. You can go beyond that. You can even go to the King James Bible, and the essences are the same. Or you can go to Einstein's postulates about relativity. And in the context of general relativity, every moment of time that has ever existed has to still exist because it cannot not exist. So there is a plane of time that physics says is always there. Every moment that has, starting from the Big Bang until the end. The interesting thing is that the future already exists, not just 10 minutes from now, but 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years from now, and 1,000,000,000,000 years from now. Every minute of time that ever has been already exists or ever will be. So it doesn't matter whether you're at any philosophy, always was and always will be. is one of those things that is that's baked into the general theory of relativity. Now, can we traverse that? I don't think so.
Right.
Now,
Right.
where would I go? It's kind of odd that we think of ourselves as an important part of the great fabric of space-time. And of course, we tend to think of where would I go on this planet, and what time frame would I go to? And neither forward nor backward for me. I'm having too much fun where I am.
Oh, come on, Steve. Let's hear. You don't want to go back, Egyptian times, or even you're not even like interested to see what 100 years from now would look like. And by the way, you could come back to the present time. Don't think you're gonna stay there.
Well, in that I can't suspend disbelief enough to venture into that possibility. I of course have tremendous curiosity about the future. I would like to know more about the election in November of 2024, but
yeah, that's one's looking forward to that one.
I don't know.
As far as the level of detail, it would be amusing, but it would probably be overwhelming. I'm not sure that I have the capacity to be able to understand even 100 years ago or 100 years in the future. Because my father's existence, he was born in 1912. He'd be 111 now.
My grandfather was born in 1912 as well.
So I guess I'm sure that I would be the cultural shock that I would be confronted with to go back to 1912 would probably be beyond my capacity to understand. And in many ways, beyond even being able to formulate the questions, I might not even be able to understand the nuances of the language that they spoke among my father and my grandfather. So I don't know. If I move 100 years in the future, my guess is that I wouldn't be able to understand or the cultural shock associated with that. And I'm saying this from the question is framed in the context of fantasy. This is the only context in which it is even an intriguing idea. From a practical perspective, the cultural shock that I would be confronted with to move 100 years forward or 100 years back would probably be so overwhelming that I'd want to go home right away.
I actually disagree with you, Steve. I think that you would be the cultural shock, and that everyone else would just be staring and saying, how could he say that? What does he mean? How did he appear? And you would be smiling, your Cheshire Cat smile, and say, well, let's just try it.
Well, that's possible. That's possible.
This reminds me of a song by Lyle Lovett. I'm not sure what the song title is, but the recurring line is, I've had an excellent time so far, and the only thing I'm worrying about is I've been up so long on this great life, it could only be downhill from here.
Well, that's kind of the way I look at it.
Except you're defying the odds, Steve, because you keep moving things forward. And I really loved hearing the explanation of Crisiscience and the way that came forward. This came after you and I had already known each other for a long time, but it is the way that you built it and brought in people and responded to them and let the thing move forward and then fostered it is a real case study in how to bring people together for a cause who do come from multiple different perspectives. And I was really intrigued by your explanation. It's one of the most cogent descriptions of gender differences and how to make them a positive that I've ever heard. And it just completely skips all of the politics and religion and everything else and goes to the essential of how important it is for us to listen to each other and how to defang the anger and anxiety that people experience around those things and turn it into a positive. And I just want to applaud that.
John, I have to admit that I've been the question of would I go forward or backward in time is something I haven't considered as much as what would I feel or what would I experience if my brain suddenly was connected to someone else's brain and I could experience life the way they experience it. And that includes what if I was suddenly a woman? And I don't mean I suddenly transform myself physically into a woman. No, what if suddenly my brain was female? What if I suddenly became a lesbian? What if I suddenly became gay? What if I suddenly became any of these different perspectives, and how would I view the world? And then it also occurs to me, what if I was my granddaughter? How would my brain be shaped differently than, and how would I perceive the world? So that's a more intriguing question to me about current perceptions than the idea of maybe going back to medieval times, which would be interesting. But I've always wondered, even as a little kid, what it would be like to have someone else's brain.
Well, and that's of course the topic of endless science fiction and fantasy stories, and I think it's a very fruitful train of thought to explore for people, because what you're talking about, one of the things you're talking about is empathy, and another thing you're talking about is your constant question of how would something look to me if I were different from the way I am now. And that is that's an intellectual approach, really, that is key to a lot of the innovation that you've been able to stimulate in other people by your various groupings, your drive to conspire. So it's been fun to talk about that. Amanda, do you have any further comments?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that conversation what Steve was saying about wondering what it would be like for a different brain, because today I was talking with my daughter and the topic of personality came up. And not to get too deep, but she was asking me about like the soul, like what is the soul? What type of energy is it? And I sort of gave her an answer with, well, it's different for everybody, but then it also depends on the personality of that person, which is dictated by brain chemistry and, of course, childhood experiences. So with your question, Steve, I was just like thinking about it. What if you had someone else's brain? Would you still react to the world in the same way as that person, unless you had identical experiences from birth to whatever point in their life it's now? So I guess my point is that there are so many factors that affect who we are, how we view the world, that that's why it's, I guess, studied so much. And I don't know if we could ever come up with an answer to that.
Well, even with identical twins who grew up in the same household, they eventually do begin to exhibit different tendencies.
Yeah. So that the more you think about it, it's like, do we really understand personality? What makes us different, even though we have identical environmental factors? We're still our own person.
Yep.
Yeah. And Steve is more his own person than just about anybody else I know. So the last thing we ask Steve is, the last question is, do you have kind of one or two sentences that you would like to leave with our audience? What are some of the things you'd like them to think about?
Well, it's a why I try a tribe. It's one more than a diatribe, and who needs more than one tribe?
Right. Okay. I think I got it. Now, if somebody wanted to reach out to you or just to get more information about what you're up to, where would they go?
I don't know. I often drive people crazy because I'm not very present on the internet, and I try not to be. So I try to have an invisible footprint. You mentioned ghosting. I like to ghost myself. So
That's hilarious.
Well, and I respect
use
that. Not everybody wants to have a lot of people getting in touch with them. And I think that your work with Crisiscience Collaborative certainly gives you a pass on everybody in the world being able to get in touch with you. Thank you very much, Steve. It's been a lot of fun to talk with you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vision 2222. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Our YouTube channel is called Vision 2222 Podcast, all one word. We're also on Podbean at vision2222podcast.podbean.com. Again, Vision 2222 Podcast is all one word. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vision 2222. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Please also comment, and we'll do our best to respond.